So, and you should be live. So, you should be good, Caleb.
Okay. So I guess I just start out by introducing myself. My name is Caleb Wissenback. I'm the founder of CK Studios. I do a lot of commission work. I do a lot of tabletop army stuff like that, but I also do display models. I enter a lot of competitions and stuff like that. So I thought, this weekend I judged at KublaCon, and I got a lot of questions afterwards. And one of the biggest discussions that I had the entire weekend was how to create more interest and contrast with your models, how to create that fourth focus. You'll hear that a lot. You'll hear focal point stuff like that. Especially when you start looking into the display quality models, you're going to hear that a lot. But it also applies to the tabletop also. I've painted, I want to say I have 6 armies that have won Best of Shows from anywhere from Adepticon to Broadside Bash. There's been quite a few events that I've gotten the Best of Shows or fan favorite army, etc., etc. And there's a couple of simple rules that'll really help you to develop your painting so that you can create, I guess, maximum focus. You want to create attention and make sure that the viewer is seeing the focal point of your model or the focal point of your army. That way, it'll present the model better, or it'll present the army or whatever that you're working on. So that's what we're going to kind of talk about tonight. A lot of the pieces that were at KublaCon this year, wonderful pieces. And that was one thing that I really noticed, was that a lot of painters are starting to step up, and they're really taking their models to the next level. But now they need to start working on composition. Composition is the third part of the judging matrix that we use. We judge on the technicality of a piece, how well it's painted, how clean your blends are, how technically tight the model is painted. Then we also use creativity, and that's obviously trying to tell a story or create an emotion, have someone kind of follow along with you, get them interested into the model so that they look closer. And then, of course, the last piece of it is composition. So that's what we'll kind of talk about tonight, is composition. So this force focus and everything is a lot like that. So the first thing I like to do whenever I talk about composition is I like to show a couple of art pieces. What we're doing when we're painting miniatures, we're actually using 2D effects on a 3D model to create more interest, to create more vibrancy to the piece. Because light is always in scale, it's in the scale that our eyes will see. Light's going to stay in scale with a model. So what happens is that our shadows aren't deep enough, our highlights might not be tall enough, stuff like that. So we'll take 2D effects, the same tricks that they use for your standard illustrations and stuff. Like here's a great example with the smog rider and stuff. This is all 2D, but as you look at it, it can create volume, it can create movement. You get a sense of what that miniature looks like just by looking at the artwork. So we're using a lot of those effects to create the same type of volume and movement with our pieces. That's the biggest trick, is creating volume. If we can show how an arm might project further away from a model than his chest, or the hammer on a figure, he's in mid-swing, we want that hammer to stand out. So we'll use techniques to draw the eye to those pieces. So the first thing I want to do is I want to show a couple of illustrations. So I'm going to go to share, and I think this is working right. So the first piece I like to share is, no, that's not the piece, the artwork that I wanted. Let's see. So here's a really great piece that came up that I was looking through today, and it really shows how you can focus and draw attention to the piece. Here you'll notice that the focus of the model is definitely this girl here, even though this guy in the background, he's still a supporting character. We'll do a lot of stuff like what you would see in plays or even on TV and stuff. You're gonna notice that a lot of these rules will apply to miniature painting also with how we set. But the first thing is we want to draw focus to the main character, or the important aspect of the miniature. So in this artwork, we know that the face is always our focus. We always want to focus on the face of our miniatures or in artwork. So everything is designed to draw your eye. You'll notice that this brightness of the sword and everything is going to cast. Your eye is naturally drawn up along this shoulder pad to the face. Same here with this flame. This blue and red counteract each other. So it allows your eye to kind of slip into the model, and then your eye is drawn up to the face here. And there's a lot of ways that we can do that. We can use angles, and we can use like the vectors of pieces if maybe you have a sword crossing or a belt or something like that. We'll also use triangles of color. But what I want to talk about today is using light and tone values to create that focus. So on this model, obviously our light points are right here, and as we look at that light points, in actuality, this hand would probably be the brightest point on this model. If we were painting this hand would be the brightest, and this bag would be the brightest. But you'll notice they brought the values up right here at the face and along this cowling. They brought those values up super high. Those wouldn't necessarily be as bright as here because this is closer to the flame, therefore it'd gather more light. But for composition, we need this to be brighter, because if this hand is as bright as that flame, your eye is going to come down here, it's going to catch on this hand, and it's going to stop. But because it's darker, your eye naturally wants to progress along this arm and move up, along with this shoulder pad here. This shoulder pad wouldn't quite be as bright because we see the brightness here, but you'll notice that these tonal values here, even though this is blue, the tonal values here are a lot brighter than the tonal values here or here. If we were to turn this into a black and white photo, this gray would be a lot brighter than this gray here or this gray here. The reason being is we need to draw the eye forward. So this is a great piece for this artwork. I really liked how they worked the transitions in, and it's not just normal zenithal light. We talk about zenithal light all the time, where the light's coming from directly above and hitting. I like this because we have two light sources, and yet they were still able to distinguish the focus of the model, or the focus of the piece, by going straight to the face. So this is a really good explanation of that. So what we'll talk about is spheres, is global lighting or global spheres. You'll hear that talked about a lot with models. We're always painting stuff in spheres. When they talk about spheres, they usually mean, let's go back to the Hangout. When they're talking about spheres, it talks about that art technique that we always practice, like when we were in high school and stuff, where they draw a circle on a piece of paper, and then you have to go in and actually add shade and highlight to that circle and make it a sphere. So it teaches us how light and composition works, how values of light, just by creating those proper shadows and highlights, will give the idea or the perception of depth without there being depth on the page. So with that in mind, we can now look at a couple of models and have some great examples of this. Here, this model here is really good at breaking the piece down into spheres. So we would have a global sphere, which would be the entire piece. From the top of the model down to the bottom, you'll notice the brightest points are up here because our focus is the face. But this light here that would collect here would be the same value as would collect like on this knee pad here, or collect on the tip of this foot here. But what he did when he painted this is that he took all these tonal values and stepped them up. So if this was a circle, if that was that sphere, and this is the bottom, the shaded end, if we had values of our brightest value would be 1 and our darkest value would be 4 or 5, this value here would probably be about a 3. It's still a highlight, but it's less high on the tonal range than this. So it'd be darker. So if this was like a 3 value, this would probably be a 2 value here. We start to work our way up into that value. And then as we work our way up the model, you'll notice that the highlights get brighter. But none of them ever reach our focal point. Our focal point is the face. That highlight right there is very close to, but not quite as far as here. You can see that like along the nose, along the lip, along the cheek, and then right there at the forehead. He actually took this piece all the way to pure white. So that allows your eye to come and we can move directly to our focal point of the model. As soon as you take a look at this model, your eye is instantly drawn to his face. You get entranced by his face, then you start to develop that consciousness of the rest of the piece. This allows us to start to focus on more of the stuff. We can come down and start to see the details of the model, but instantly we're drawn in on this piece. If you were to walk by the counter and see this model sitting on the tabletop, you would definitely stop for a second because of the harsh contrast, because of how bright this is compared to our shadows here, our depth here. You really would see that contrast, and that would draw your eye. And so that's what we're talking about when we I'm just silencing my phone, sorry. That's what we're talking about when we talk about the color shift. This is a super advanced technique right here with this model. This is a wonderful piece. I really like his use of color and light. It's very dark. It gives a nice dark atmosphere. But we don't have to always be necessarily super dark when we're doing this. We can still use brighter colors and accomplish the same thing. So you'll notice the difference. Oh, what happened? There she is. So you'll notice on this piece here, it's a lot brighter of an atmosphere. It's more vibrant. The colors are definitely a higher touch in the tonal range, in the color temperature range, everything. But we still see the same pattern. The focus is still right here. We have that sphere that's going on, and the focus is definitely the face. You notice how bright the hair is here. That we always get that halo, and you want the hair along the face to get that nice bright halo. But then you'll notice if you look really close, you'll see those points of bright white. He's allowed us to focus on the face, yet this shoulder would collect just as much light, but he doesn't have those values as high here. The top of this hand would collect just as much light, but those values are even less. You'll notice the values of this arm, as you come down the arm, they start to drop away. So light would cast across the entirety of this arm. The top of the hand, the end of the fingers, and everything would roughly be the same tonal value as the shoulder. But because he allowed this to darken here, it instantly draws our eyes up. This knee here would be just as bright as the face. But he was able to, one, bring down the tonal value of the leg, but then he also added blues into it. If you notice, the colors in the leg don't have as much depth of color as the face. You can see a lot of reds in here. It's very vibrant, like along the stomach here. You can see a lot of reds, but then when you come down here and you start looking at the leg, there's a lot of blues in here, a lot of shadow colors. Even into the highlight, the highlight color has blues in it. It's going to really tone it down. It's going to allow the skirt to pop without the leg dominating, which still carries your eye straight up. If you look at this piece from the tip of the foot all the way up, there's a natural progression of the eye. It's going to catch on all of these highlight points until you finally hit the focus of the model. So that's what we're talking about with composition, is how we're going to shift the eye, how we're going to control the eye and force it to move where we want to. So at this point, I kind of go into displaying a few figures, but if you guys have any questions, I'd probably open it now to any questions you guys might have.
There we go. You should all be unmuted.
So any questions?
So when you're looking at a model and you're deciding how to actually look at it in spheres, how do you break a model down into spheres? I understand the highlight as far as being the top portion or the face of it, but there's actually other spheres going on the model.
Okay.
How do you look at a model and actually break it down into that?
Let's go back into screen sharing. Did I turn it off? I did. Okay, so are you able to see this?
Yep.
Okay, so this model is a really great example of that. Is not only do we have a global sphere, but then each section of the model is broken up into a sphere. So you'll notice this shoulder pad. The highlight is here on top. Our shadows are along the bottom and the side. These hands. This hand is a sphere right here, where the values at the very top of the fingers are brighter than the values here, which are brighter than the values here, obviously, which are brighter than the values here. But also in that hand is broken up into even more spheres because each finger is broken down into a sphere. So here the highlight is super obvious because it's a sphere, it's an actual sphere you're seeing. But the highlight at the top of the circle works down to the shadow. So we have that sphere working, we have a bigger sphere working around it, then we have an even bigger sphere here because you're going to draw your eye across this arm. Here, this gun and everything works as a sphere. If you'll notice that we have our highlights here, and as they work down, even our highlight points gain in shadow as they come down. This cloth, we have our highlight, which is right here. And a lot of times what will happen is an artist will carry this highlight all the way down here because they see that as the very outside edge of the cloak. They're going to highlight that cloak all the way. But you'll notice the brightest point of that cloak is right here. And then it shadows down. It shadows down this way. It shadows down this way. So even this section is broken into a sphere. Again here, you can see it on the cloth. This is our brightest highlight point right here, even though this is further out and it would collect just as much light as here, maybe more because some of this gear up here might shadow that, but because we need that movement, we need that constant movement up to our focus point, we're going to paint that with those spheres in mind to carry up. This knee is a sphere, and then you'll notice this whole section of this leg from the knee all the way down to the foot is broken down into one sphere. And then this leg pad is broken into one sphere. You can see the break in it from here to here. So we're going to take a look at a model when we initially get it, and we'll want to kind of find focal points, interest points, that might not necessarily catch the proper light in the proper sense, but it definitely creates more interest. This knee would be a lot more interesting with all the color work he did. If he had done that knee like this knee, it would be very boring. It would be very boring to look at. Our eye would instantly move up here. We'd see the face. We'd kind of lose the details here. We'd leave, and then we're kind of done looking at the model. But because we come in, we're drawn to the face. We stop. We start to look. You start to develop interest in the model. You start seeing the detail work. You start seeing the stitching along the cloth, the knee pad, all that stuff. It's about that depth of interest. We're going to draw the viewer in. And then we want to keep them there. We don't want the viewer just looking at it and leaving. That's very applicable when it comes to armies. When you're painting an army, to have a judge come and look at it, if your army is very monotone, it might be nicely painted, but nothing stands out, nothing's terribly bright. What happens is the judge will come in, he'll make the assumption that it doesn't matter where he looks, the back is going to look exactly like the front. So he'll just come in, do a cursory look of the model. He might not even notice some of the conversion work you did, or some of the texture work, like if you'd done texture in the cloak like this or something. They might glaze past that. Their eyes would kind of look at that and leave. That's what I ran into my first year at Adepticon. I brought a Soul Drinkers army. I was super, super pleased with it. It took months to paint. Each model was individually painted, so I was very excited for it. Every model was converted, everything. My problem was that was a purple and bone army, which purple and bone don't really contrast much. They don't create much interest. And then it was on top of a gray flagstone base with like a little, almost like a church courtyard that they were surrounded in. So everything was very gray. There was a lot of blues in it and stuff like that. It didn't create a lot of interest. Almost every model was converted. They had custom sculpts. The chaplain that I did was almost a full sculpt. Um, every icon on him was sculpted. Everything. It was just a base model chaplain, and I got 0 conversion points for the army. And I was really bummed about that, and I looked at the army, and I kind of went over what had happened, and then I went over and looked at some of James Wapple's work. And the biggest thing I noticed was that James put composition into his piece. His models had varying characteristics in color that allowed you to focus on 1 or 2 models in the army. Once you can trap somebody into looking directly at the models in the army, their eye begins to you start to see, you become aware of more of what's going on with the piece. It allows you to get drawn in, and then you start to investigate the piece. And then maybe you'll see the little mouse that's under the guy's boot, or you're doing an ultramarine army, and then you'll notice the word bearer's shoulder pad or something like that. It's those little characteristics, but you have to catch the eye first. So that composition still comes into play with that. I have a couple of examples of models that I have. I'm going to turn off the screen sharing. I hope that answered the question about breaking a model down into spheres. It just kind of got me on the next tangent, which comes into a lot with army painting. So I turned off the share. Now I'm going to switch over cameras real fast.
And Charles also had a question that he posed in the chat area. I don't know if you can see that. Let's see. Would OSL affect your sphere also?
Okay. Yes, it does. In the first picture that I was showing, and I closed out all my pictures, of course. Let me go back in to share real quick. In this picture here, so we have OSL going on. It's creating these 2 different light sources. You'll notice the blue OSL here, the orange OSL here, but our spheres have changed. So before we were talking about our spheres coming from directly above, but now our spheres are created right from this light source. This is the dominant light source that the artist used in this piece. So you'll notice that though this arm still, we talked about this earlier about how this hand is darker, this should be brighter. But we need to carry up to the face. So he created this as the brightest spot, but it's not at the top of the shoulder that the light carries up. Instead of coming up the shoulder like in that model we were just showing you, we come across the model to the face. We're coming forward here because that light is reflecting. So this is actually, of this little sphere here that we create with this arm and shoulder, this is the focal point here as we come across it. This gem right here, the brightest spot is here, but because we need to carry up and to the face, he carried that highlight along the edge here. So that's composition-wise, this is kind of a fail, but I mean, realistically wise, this is kind of a fail, but for composition, it needs to carry up to here. So he's allowed this edge to be bright here, and then he lightened these coins right here and here to allow you to carry up to the face for that composition. So yes, even with OSL, we're going to bend the rules, but we don't necessarily break the rules because we still need that global sphere. That global sphere needs to be predominant. If you don't shift your eye for the focus of where you need to be, this could become the focus of the model. And this is what we don't want this to be the focus. That is not as interesting as a face. A face always tells us very good stories. So if we start to lose that, then we'll lose the judges or our audience. I mean, not necessarily judges, but our audience. They quickly lose interest in a model if that's the focus. Here, this guy, he's using the blue as his predominant focus here. That blue would reflect across the chest the brightest, but you'll notice this arm doesn't pick up all the light, and it should. This arm is much further forward than this face. But because of that, he allowed that sphere to shift, and so that sphere now goes down instead of up. Before that sphere, what we talked about on the model, our light focus would be up. It's down right here. Our brightest points are here, but it still creates a vector that draws us to here, which draws us up to the face, the brightest point. So you can really notice on this face that the highlights, but it's not the same sphere. Before, on the other model, we were using zenithal lighting. Our brightest highlight was up here. Our brightest highlight is now down here. But the beard can't be the focal point of it. The eyes are the focal point. So you notice those really vibrant, bright spots he put there. Our eye is still drawn to his eyes, to his face. So yes, even with OSL, we're still going to break the model down into spheres. We're just going to shift how they focus so that they still contribute to the global sphere to create focus.
For some of the people that may watch this video later, Caleb, that are newer to it, can you explain what zenithal highlight is? You've mentioned it a couple of times.
Zenithal highlight is just natural highlight. Zenithal is top. So that would be the natural highlight that would come directly from the top. Am I still in screen share?
Mm-hmm.
So right here on cat, zenithal highlighting is this right here. The top of the head is the highlight. So our light's going to come down. It's going to collect here. It's going to collect along the face, the nose, the lip, the chin, along the shoulder pads here, along the shoulder here and here. So zenithal lighting is just strictly lighting from above. We always want to do that, and I'm going to switch over to my camera real quick. Okay, so I'm on my camera now, and we'll talk kind of about zenithal highlighting. Let's see. Oop. Okay. I'm still playing with this camera. It's relatively new. This model here, is that pretty clear?
No, it's not coming in.
It's still trying to focus down here. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, guys.
There you go.
So zenithal highlighting would strictly be that lighting that comes in directly from the top. You'll notice on this model, if you turn and look directly down in this model, you're going to see all the highlights. The highlights all pop very brightly. The top of the gun, the top of the shoulder, the backpack, the top of the helmet here. It's shifted just a little bit because our focus is going to be forward. This is a tabletop model, so we want our focus to be above and to the front of the model. Whereas with like a display piece, our focus might roll just a little bit, and we might focus more like this. For tabletop, we want to focus about right here, because that's what you're going to see as you're walking across the table. You're about 3 feet higher than the table. You're always looking down on Space Marines. One little trick that I have, and he's not really done with this model because the helmet wouldn't actually let you, but whenever I'm putting my models together for tabletop, I always tilt the heads up. I always have them forward with the chin out. The reason being is that that's how you're going to see the face. As you're standing above the model, looking at the model, right now, if I'm standing above that model, I'm looking at the top of his head. I'm not really looking at his face. But if I were to tilt his head up, you'd get a nice focus on his face. So when you're building your models, composition comes into just building. The guy might be, shooting forward like this model is doing, but if you tilt his head up, yeah, he's not really looking at the target. He'd have to be looking down his nose to hit the target, but it gives the viewer a chance to see the face of the model, so we can create that focus. And you'll notice here I still have that sphere. Down here, the bottom of the foot, though it would still catch just as much light as the top. See, if you notice, if you look down on the model from above, you can still see the feet. And the camera light is reflecting off of it a little bit, but once I turn it and the entire model is collecting the same light, you'll notice the legs are a lot dimmer. I brought down a lot of the color in the legs, but I brought it up a little bit in the hand, but then I went the furthest along the face, along the shoulder pad, along the backpack, because that's where our focus is going to be on the model. So that forced focus is just as simple as just shifting your tonal values up when you're creating your colors for your model. Here, the Dreadnought is another really good example of that. So if you take a look at this dreadnought, you'll notice that the colors, there we go. The colors at the top of the model are much brighter than the bottom of the model. As we move down the model gets darker and darker and darker. But if we keep that highlight above, as soon as you look at that model, so when you're sitting on the table, your first focus is going to come right at the face, right at the top of the model, and then everything I do, I work towards that highlight from the shoulder pads in, from the chest up, everything, all that stuff works towards the top of the model. So the same thing applies, that like what I was talking about in those pictures and with the display models. We're going to do the same thing with our tabletop models, but again we shift that focus. You'll notice the top of this model, especially if he's just shifted a little bit forward, the top of this model is much brighter than the front of this model, because our focus is going to be at that point where you're looking at that model from slightly above and slightly forward. Whereas when we come to like a display piece, here's a display piece. If we're looking at it from up and forward, it becomes a very boring piece. Let's see if the camera will focus. You'll notice here that from kind of forward with that 45 degree, the model doesn't have a lot of focus to it. We're looking at the top of his cap and stuff like that. But as soon as I can roll that model, and then we become more in line with how you would view a display piece. We're normally going to squat down and look at a display piece. That's the difference between like a tabletop and a display piece, is that everybody inevitably, if you've gone to Adepticon and you've looked at the cases, you always see people laying on the floor to look at the models on the bottom shelf. That's because we want to get eye level with it so we can catch as much detail. So we shift our focus now. So instead of it being very forward up top, our plane is now a little straighter on, but it still has that same focus. You'll notice all of these highlights and everything bring you up to the face. The brightest section of this model is the face. The lapels on the front of the coat are brighter than, like, say, the red right here along the leg, you know, where the blanket is and stuff. The red up here is much brighter because we want that eye to come across and up and focus on where we're at. Same thing with the horse. Even though we're catching a little bit of light reflection here, this shoulder is not that bright, but the paint is slightly glossy. But in proper lighting, that's a little better, I think. You'll notice this section of the horse is a lot darker than this section up here. This creates a lot more movement up and back. The whites in the face are picking up just a little bit more than they should with the camera, but right there, you know, I think I can adjust the exposure on this. I keep forgetting I can do that. Oh, there we go. There we go. Now you can really start to see the color shift now. You'll notice that the variations in color are created to draw your eye up and to him. Instead of the horse being the focus or the body being the focus, our eyes are instantly drawn up to him, to his face. So that's kind of the basics of composition and how we work in spheres and stuff. When you have questions about that stuff, it's really good to just look at some of the illustrations, some of the art that's out there. Go to your local gaming store and look at some of the Warhammer cameras and stuff, or not cameras, the Warhammer posters and stuff that are up. Those guys just do a fantastic job of showing that shift and those color changes. So I can open up to questions. Does anybody have any questions?
And I've unmuted everybody so everybody can participate now.
So Caleb, you were talking about display pieces and showing armies. How do you balance when you're displaying an army where you have animate objects, you know, people, versus inanimate objects like tanks or flyers or something like that? So your eye is scattered all over the place, but you really want them to focus in on whoever the leader or the commander, you know, whatever that main piece is.
Okay, so we're going to do almost the exact same thing as what I showed you with the miniatures, or when I showed you with the painting, but we're just going to do that on a larger scale. So if that commander is the focus of our army, anytime I start an army, I start considering who the focus of that army is going to be, and I'll choose my color scheme around that. So say you were doing Dante with Blood Angels. Um, Dante's super easy to cheat with because he's in gold armor, whereas the Blood Angels are in red armor. So what I'll do is maybe on the outskirts of the army, I would put like my Death Company, because there's going to be a lot of nice blacks and dark blues and stuff like that in there. That's going to help draw your eye into the reds. So then, like the main body of my army would surround Dante with those reds. So again, I'm shifting my eyes in and up to my focus point. And it doesn't necessarily need to be right in the middle of your display board. It can be staggered out. You know, Dante could be in one corner and still be the focus of the army because of how you paint that army. If you're doing Ultramarines, say you want to do the same thing. So Dante's kind of a cheat. He's going to be in gold armor, which allows you to really jump in and see that gold. But we can do stuff like, say, an Ultramarines army with the blues and the whites and stuff like that. What I'll start to do is along the outside of the army, maybe I'll start to place more rhinos, drop pods, stuff like that. Something very bulky, and then we can actually use a weight balance to move your eye, because your eye will also distinguish different weights. If tanks are in the middle of your army, they'll become the focus of it. So if you have an army with a couple of tanks or a drop pod and you put that directly in the center of your display board, your eye is instantly going to get drawn to that drop pod. So we can play it two ways. We can either leave that drop pod where it is and then put your commander directly in front of it with maybe a banner holder or somebody that says, hey, look at me, something that's really nice and bright and vibrant and going to draw your eye in. So as you walk across the army, your natural inclination will be to see that drop pod first. So as soon as the eye comes by and it sees that drop pod, it'll see, oh gosh, what is his name? Calgar. Maybe you'll have Calgar standing directly in front of that drop pod. The eye will catch on that drop pod, and then it'll go down and see Calgar. Or you can do it the opposite way. You can take and stack, say you have a Rhino Rush army or something. You can stack those Razorbacks or Rhinos along the edges of the army, and maybe just offset them enough, hold one or two towards the middle. What'll happen is your eye will see all those tanks on the outside, then it'll see a tank or two inside. It'll create that natural vector of where your eyes are going to follow those tanks in, and then place Calgar there. It'll create those vectors. So you can even do it, even if your army is all the same color, you can do it with weight placement. There's a million little ways to do this. I used to teach a class on this, but it didn't seem to be terribly popular at conventions because tournament players are playing tournaments all day. And the last thing you want to do when you get out of a tournament is go sit in a 2-hour class on composition. But it was a really good class that talked about how to actually create the composition of a display board in the army to have the judge actually look at your pieces. Because that's the same trick applies as with a single figure, is you want to draw the viewer in. Don't allow them to just gloss over it and think that they've seen everything. Draw them in, trap them, make them look at one thing, and then you'll notice once you see one piece, especially if that piece has got a ton of detail on it, so like that mainstay figure, that captain, or that Archon or whatever, make sure that you do him the best in your army for paint-wise. Add some freehand to it if you can. Do your decal work on that model. Add some vibrant colors to it and stuff like that to create interest. That really helps. And then another thing you can do, and this is kind of a cheat, but judges don't look at your army list. Judges just look at what's on the table. So when you're going for that best of paint, take your favorite unit. You might have an honor guard and with a badass banner or something like that. But honor guards suck. Everybody knows that they're a waste of points. There's better sinks for points. Put that honor guard in your display. Surround your captain with it. Maybe you might not even have a chapter master in your army. Maybe you're running say you're running White Scars. Well, no, White Scars you'd have Khan in there, but say you're running I don't know, like Iron Hands. you wouldn't really run an Iron Hands Captain because they're just not terribly effective. There's other models that are more effective. You're gonna kind of do the a lot of troop type thing, but do up a squad of Morlocks in that black armor and put that captain in there and put that black armor with those Morlocks right in the middle of that display. They're not part of your army, they're not part of your list, but they are eye-catching on the table. So as soon as that judge comes by, he's going to stop and look because he saw those Morlocks. And it's little tricks like that that you can do that will really help draw the judge in and make sure that they stop and give your army the time it needs. And I hate to talk bad about judges. It's not like judges are inept and they're going to give as much effort as they can, but like at Adepticon, you're judging 300 armies. At LVO, I think we had 5 judges and we had to get through almost 500 armies. That's 100 armies per judge. And if it takes 5 minutes per army, you're looking at 500 minutes to get through. So, I mean, that's what, 9 hours? A little over 9 hours, or a little less than 9 hours. That one judge needs to put into judging. So eventually they're going to get to the point where they're only really going to stop to look at the very well painted armies. So if you want to catch that judge and make sure that they're really taking a look at your piece, at what you've done, and it'll really help showcase the technique that you've put in, it's really good to apply these same composition rules that we talked about earlier. Use those composition rules in your army display. It'll be the same thing. It'll work the same way. Does that answer? You can unmute them now, Kat.
Oh, yeah, I think I'm muted now. Yeah, that was a good answer. That was what I was looking for.
I think I have a question.
Okay.
Is the face always the focal point?
99.9% of the time, yes. If your figure has a point as a face, you should make that the focal point. Very rarely will anything else be the focal point. You might even have an object that kind of tells the story. You'll make that, like, say you were doing a wizard with a soul stone, and the whole story is how he stole somebody's soul, and it's in the stone. The stone still can't be brighter than the face because the eye will instantly go down to the stone. You'll see the stone, and the tendency for a person is to see the detail point and move on. There's something about faces that the human eye recognizes, and they search for the story when you see a face. So yes, you instantly are attracted as a human. You're instantly attracted to the face of a model. Whether it's a dwarf or a giant or whatever, your eye instantly wants to focus on the face. It wants to see that story, and when it can't, you'll notice that your interest in the piece will slip. Any other questions?
That was really good. That was really good.
And this all is just one part of the entirety of color theory and composition. We're gonna use stuff like I talked about: weight, color, temperature, light. It's so complex. There's so many aspects that you can use. It's really good if you get a chance. Sit in on a color theory class. It'll really be worth it. Even if you're just an army painter, sit in on a color theory class, because all of that stuff is still applicable even to just your standard tabletop army.
Do you know of any like tutorials or guides or books or anything like that we can go to get information on color theory?
There's quite a few out there, and we don't necessarily need to stick with just miniature-oriented ones. For a miniature-oriented one, Figlopedia is really good. The volume 1 is all about color and light, and he talks a lot about what I just went over. There's a whole section that talks about breaking models down into spheres, creating volume, and understanding how shapes will catch and reflect light. It's super complex. It's a great book. I've read it like 15 times, and every time I read it, I still pick up new stuff with it. Roman, Ben and them were talking about one in his class earlier today. If you get a chance, go into the Hobby Hangout and check out the chat for Ben Comet's his Hobby Hangout earlier today. And in the comments, Roman linked a really good art book that's really good for color theory, composition, and stuff like that. But there's a ton of books out there. Look at some of the art books. Just do a search for color theory, and there'll be mountains of it. There's a lot of good articles online about it. There's quite a few blogs that have some good stuff. Volomir's blog has some really good stuff in it, and I want to say David's blog, I think he did an article on color theory too. I can't remember what David's is. What's his called?
For the article or for his site?
His blog.
I'll link it. I'll link all this in the chat.
All right. Yeah, so, I totally forgot, and he's gonna be bummed out. But oh well. Sorry, David.
No, I'll add it so that we can find it and people can just jump from it. That's probably easier.
All right. Well, hopefully I didn't ramble too much tonight. So that could probably end the live part of it. And then we can just go into a regular Hangout now.
Sure. Unless you want to keep filming just for the regular Hangout. That's up to you.
I don't think we need to.
Okay.
I don't know that would add any value on the YouTube channel.
Not really. All right. I'm going to stop the broadcast now. Thank you so much, Caleb. That was an excellent tutorial on that.
Absolutely. Thank you.